listening to the presentation. We want to take a look at, focusing on the background that will be presented, the major players in the theory, the concepts, key concepts. How should or how do these theories influence our work with children? Do we really use them? Do we use theoretical frameworks in configuring our classrooms, our programming, and the work that we do? And what kind of research supports the theories that we're talking about? Thank you, Tanya.
Okay. Let me just see if I know how to use this quickly.
Okay.
I do not.
Do you want me to click for you?
How do you click on this big guy?
I don't know if that's the,
It looks like the TV
might not
may be
that's
able
not
to.
it. I don't know.
You
if
might
we
have to
can.
click.
You might have to click.
Okay.
No
Okay.
problem.
Oh, no.
You can do from
Oh, wait, what's up here?
I can hang here too, that's fine.
That's Panasonic, we can negative off.
I'm good, I can hang here. That way I'm not standing in front of the screen, which I prefer not to.
Okay.
Okay.
I like the present.
This is so cool. It gets cooler.
Huh.
It gets cooler. Good morning, I'm very excited to be able to present to you today Yuri Brockenbrenner's ecological systems theory. We're going to jump right in and take a look at what his theory looks like. His theory is composed of 4 different parts: the microsystem, the mesosystem, the exosystem, and the macrosystem.
We need to talk just a little bit louder, only because.
Sure. You want to make sure you capture it.
Yeah.
Okay. I will talk louder. I feel like I'm yelling at you all now,
They're not yelling.
but that's okay.
You can start all over. Let's see.
Oh, yay. See, it's fun being the first one. That way now I can make all the mistakes for everybody. Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Tanya. I'm here to talk to you today about Yuri Brockenbrenner's ecological systems theory. We're going to jump right in and take a look briefly at what his theory looks like. It's composed of 4 different pieces: the microsystem, the mesosystem, the exosystem, and the macrosystem. And these sound a little bit overwhelming at first, but we're going to go through every single piece of the system, and I'm not going to do it alone. I'm going to have the help of a little friend, which we'll see in our presentation. So you'll see my helper. So let's talk a little bit first about Mr. Brockenbrenner and understand what his concept was about. His main concept started from a study that was done in the 1870s on the effects of the neighborhood on the development of children's concepts. Now, his work was contrary to what the proposed belief was that child development was purely biological. He was taking the standpoint of saying that it's the environment. We're looking at environments. He's done a lot of collaboration with his environment theory, and he was looking at working with folks that were mental and physical health, education, social work, and developmental psychologists. His focus was involving a child's family and community in the intervention effort. And I put a picture of him on there so we can all see. And I have a few quotes throughout the presentation of what he thought was important steps. So in order to develop normally, a child requires progressively more complex joint activity with one or more adults who have an irrational emotional relationship with the child. Somebody's got to be crazy about that kid. That's number 1, first, last, and always. And I think we can all subscribe to that quote in some way, shape, or form. So let's take a look at the beginning of ecological systems theory. And the systems theory views a person as developing within a complex system of relationships that are going to be affected by multiple levels, as we saw in the first slide. And we're going to unpack that. I had to put another quote in here. There's no more critical indicator of the future of a society than the character, competence, and integrity of its youth. And here's the unpacking of the system that we're going to begin with, the 4 different levels. So let's meet Pat. Pat's going to be my little helper. Pat's going to take us through the 4 different levels of the system. We're gonna learn a little bit about Pat because it's important to know what his background is and how that background is gonna relate to each one of the different systems. So Pat's a 7-year-old little boy. He lives with his mother in an apartment in Center City, Allentown. If you're not familiar with Allentown, it's a city that's undergoing some economic development. So there's a lot of great revitalization projects that are happening there. He goes to school from his house, and then he goes to childcare because his mother works 2nd shift. His mother receives subsidy to help with Pat's childcare expenses, and the family also receives food stamps. These are important when we're kind of correlating all his systems together. So Pat's first system is the microsystem. These are all the factors that are going to be affecting his immediate contained environment. So we have Pat's school, his child care program is part of his microsystem, his family up there, got a big family there, Pat. And then we have some of his peers in the corner. These are his peers that are at school, his peers that are with him during child care. So the microsystem is going to contain Pat's social roles and interpersonal roles. He has the most control over his microsystem. It's where his direct interactions are going to be taking place, and it's the most research has generally been done on the microsystem within the socio-cultural settings. So this is sort of the innermost workings of his environment. And I had to stick something else there. So in today's world, parents find themselves at the mercy of society, which imposes pressures and priorities that allow neither time nor place for meaningful activities and relationships between children and adults, which downgrade the role of parents and the function of parenthood, and which prevent the parent from doing things he wants to do as a guide, friend, and companion to his child.
You know something that's so interesting that you selected that quote, because our conversation this morning, we could substitute parent for child care provider, and it exactly mirrors the sentiments that you all expressed when we look at society. And so society being your macro system, but also society for a child care provider, for a practitioner, for a child care leader, is the rules and regulations, the standards and what have you, that macro society or governing agency, so to speak, places on those of us who work with children. So it's an excellent quote that really mirrors what you just discussed.
The next level that we're going to talk about in Pat's world is going to be his mesosystem. And his mesosystem is how the interactions in his microsystem affect Pat. That sounds like a lot of different words, so let's unpack that. His mesosystem is looking at what happens within his microsystem. So let me give you an example. Pat gets a really good grade on his report card. So he's a happy little guy. His family decides to take him to the park. At the park, he gets to interact with his peers. So that's the whole integration of how that push and pull of how things affect in his microsystem then move out into his mesosystem. Maybe there can be positive pieces in the mesosystem. There could also be negative reactions that might happen. Let's say at the park, one of Pat's little friends gives him a punch. So that's a negative reaction. They have to leave the park early. So the mesosystem is how the interactions happen in the microsystem. And as I said, it's the system of the microsystem, and it's the connections that happen within those pieces. It's also helpful too for researchers to observe the child's behavior in multiple settings. So it's not just how the child reacts within the school setting, how does the child react with the peers, how does the child react within childcare, so it's the multiple settings. The next setting that we're going to look at, the next layer I should say, is Pat's exosystem. And the exosystem is all the factors that affect Pat, but he doesn't quite have control over these things. So it's the industry that Pat might be able to work in one day. It's his neighbors. He doesn't have any choice over where he lives and what kind of people surround him. Human service agencies that are able to support Pat. And then all the different things with the media that are involved too. What society is like, what things are on the television, the internet, what kind of access he has to those resources. As I had said in the beginning, with my little story about Pat, he has access to human services, and that's a huge part of his exosystem in the fact that his child care is provided through CCIS. His mom also has food stamps that help support his health and the family. So his exosystem is a huge part with the human services piece of how well he's able to function and how his health and well-being are affected. So to just reinforce that, it's another social setting in which he has no control. He has no control over if his mom retains her subsidy benefits. He has no control over if food stamps comes his way and he has a great meal that month. There's a couple main exosystems that affect child development, and that would be the parent's workplace, the family social networks, and the neighborhood community. And when you think about that a little bit, if Pat's mom loses her job, he's going to have a problem with being able to eat and being able to have access to perhaps even a home. The family social networks, who his family decides to spend time with, that's going to affect him greatly as well. And then the neighborhood community, we had talked about Pat being in an area of revitalization. That's going to affect as well what kind of opportunities he sees for himself in the future. And the last system we're going to take a look at for our buddy Pat is the Microsystem. And that is the overarching culture that he's growing up in. So actually, as you had mentioned about the different countries, how that could all tie together, what's the culture, what's the environment, how does that all play together into what Pat's expressing and how things are working in his different systems. So he could be growing up in a culture that's full of violence. He could be growing up in a culture that's full of, as we had talked about, the thought of revitalization. So it's whatever the cultural norms are that are affecting Pat in that particular level. So some other things would be belief systems, if he has access to material resources, customs, lifestyles, hazards, and life course options. What he has the ability then, as an adult, to be able to move into an industry. The last piece of this is an extra added layer on top of the 4 systems, and that's the Chronosystem. And that's when we're looking at the change or the consistency in the characteristics of a person, but also the environment in which the person lives. It's looking at the time span, basically, of what's happening at that particular moment, and how does this affect how the child's developing, and how does this affect how Pat's developing. For example, if Pat had grown up during the Depression, how does that time span affect how the children inside the Depression were able to develop as opposed to children who were outside of the Depression? So it's kind of looking at that snapshot of time, and then how are children developing within those 4 layers within that snapshot of time. So how does this all influence how we work with children? This is a little bit complex. How does it all actually play out for all of us? And interesting enough, the idea of the different levels is credited to Brockenbrenner actually helping develop the Head Start model. So he's known as the unofficial father of Head Start. Back when he had worked with the different committees, his ideas were different, and he was looking at a research model, and he wanted to affect social policies. So he was able to start the federal child development program for low-income children and their families, and we all are familiar with the Head Start program. How I was able to tie in how we use this theory to what I particularly work with was the Keystone Star standards, something that I'm more familiar with. And looking at some of the different standards, I actually put a few up here that I'm sure are near and dear to all of your ladies' hearts. some things that tie into the Ecosystem, providing families with information regarding public, social, and community services. We're making that tie in from the standards to the Ecosystem, pulling it in, looking at a written plan to refer families to social, mental health, educational wellness, and medical services outside of the microsystem, then pulling from the Ecosystem. And I have another example of microsystem, and most of what the standards tie into are related directly into the microsystem. So tying in the parent involvement into the pieces of the standards that are developmentally appropriate there, and they're in Pat's sphere of most influence. Specific group or classroom information is shared with families using a visual communication format, getting that communication with the family every day. Providing information on topics to make sure the parent's current with how to support their child, and offering the conferences tying in the pieces of the parent involvement to help make sure that Pat's supported in his studies within school. So to give you a little bit of summation here, we have the 5 levels that we discussed. In microsystem, we have, I should have pushed back to my other paper there, because I want to make sure I had it correct. Sorry about that. The mesosystem, the exosystem, and the macrosystem, and then pulling it all together is the chronosystem. We're looking at the time span that and what is happening in the environment across those 4 levels at the time we're studying the child. The most studied level is the microsystem, and each level is going to have an effect on development. In the environment in which a human lives is going to govern their lifelong development. So to give you a little follow-up about Pat, Pat's going to be just fine. Pat lives in the Allentown Promise neighborhood, which is an area that is saturated with resources as part of the Allentown Revitalization Zone. So that is another thing I was thinking of as I was driving in today. I'm like, how else do I tie in how else do I tie in this theory? Well, the Allentown Promise Zone is an area that I work with, and they are partnering with all the different agencies that are within that ecosystem for Pat to be able to pull in resources. So he's going to have access to higher quality childcare. He's going to have access to more school readiness options. He's going to have access to higher quality health options, and also he's going to be having his mom supported by some different parenting techniques and classes. So Pat's going to be okay. He's good within this whole theory. And here are my lovely resources. So thank you all for your time. If you have any questions.
Okay, so let's leave that up, and let's do a little bit of unpacking. Once again, based on some of the things that you brought up this morning. And if you can go back to the slide where you talked about the 3 main things affected by the ecosystem. And you had 3 things that you looked at. Yes, it's before this.
So cool, isn't it? I love this system.
Oh, there we
There
go.
you go. All right, so the 3 main exosystems to affect child development. Parents' workplace. Okay, let's talk a little bit about that, because what do we really know about where families work? I mean, we do an intake, we get the place of employment of mom and dad, or whoever the caretaker is for the child. We get an emergency contact person in case we can't get the family at work. Should we know anything else? Here is, according to Brockenbrenner, his ecological systems theory, and it is a systems theory. It is the how varying layers, excuse me, from an ecological perspective, how these various layers impact the individual. So, do we need to know anything else about the family's workplace?
I think we would need to know the hours that they're working, and we would also need to know how much effort, I wanna say, is put into that. So are parents coming home extremely tired from hard labor every day? Are they exhausted because they're working 2 jobs? There's a lot of factors that really need to be known about a parent's workplace, so we're able to better service the child while they're in our care.
Okay, good.
I think we also need to know, like, some of the places where my parents work, if they call off so many times, they're gonna get like a strike against them, or they're gonna get fired. So, sometimes they bring them and say, call me in 5 minutes when I get to work, and then I don't get this strike against, like
Right.
learning their HR policies for how they.
We've all done that?
Excellent,
Mhm.
excellent. What else do we need to know?
I think tying into the parents' workplace too, as Grace was saying, how tired they're gonna be, what level of parent engagement are you gonna be able to get from them?
Yes.
Correct.
Huge.
Absolutely. So, and you're doing that because, so your expectation does not exceed the grasp
Yeah.
of the family, which, what does that do? It adds to the frustration.
Yep.
Yes.
Another important thing about the workplace, these are all excellent things, but another important thing about the workplace that we should know. We won't know it totally, but because it has bearing on family resources.
Like
Child-
the rate of pay, like,
Absolutely,
Right.
Yeah.
absolutely,
Right, okay.
absolutely. What
And
do
how
they
many
get?
hours?
And how many hours. So, I want to know in real life, in reality, in the programs that you operate, how much focus do we put on the family workplace? I'm asking that for a specific, is it a high focus area?
no.
For us, it's a medium focus area, only because of the situation that we're in. We're in a low-income population, and we need to make the necessary referrals as needed. So we try to get to know the families as much as possible. Our focus is mainly on the child. Our second focus is on the family and what the parents or guardians or whomever, I just call it a family because everybody has different families, what the families, the
And I think
caregivers
that's
of that
important,
child
like,
are doing.
For new providers too, even when they're sending out letters, like, you
It's
don't
not
wanna
a
write
family.
dear parents,
Right.
you always wanna write like.
Dear families.
Good point.
Everybody's a
Very
family.
good point, because we want to look at inclusivity, not exclusionary practices, particularly when we're addressing
And
groups of people. So, workplace may be not a high priority for us, and I'm gonna go
Should
back to
be.
the message, because I love
Right.
that you said that for the first
Me
thing
too.
this morning. How do we get the message out? And how do we get the message out about development? What's important for development? What do we need to know? What do we know that we have to share with other people? And I think that family workplace is important for all the reasons you just mentioned. Because we need to know, what are families making? What hours must they work? How much, sweat, what's the sweat equity?
Yeah.
For that particular job. Can they call off? Is it a family friendly? Do they have family friendly leave policies?
Yeah.
Because how many times do we hear people with whom we work say, the family's not interested. The family's just not interested. A family meeting? No, we don't have family engagement meetings because families just aren't interested. They just don't come. Okay, so we have these perpetuated mindsets about what constitutes caring about our children.
And I think our mindset comes a lot from what we would do if we were parents or as a mother, what we would expect ourselves to do. So what I expect myself to do in the beginning, before my eyes opened working at Head Start, I admit it, a long time ago, I expected everybody to do the same exact thing as I did. And it doesn't work like that. Everyone has a different situation, and learning those situations really, really, really gives us a bigger insight, which is why I'm a big proponent of home visits of families. Someday it's going to come into fruition outside of Head Start, someday. And that way we get to know our families more, and we get to learn more about them, and we're able to build that partnership with their families that in turn is going to help the development of the child to develop to their fullest potential so they're successful learners lifelong.
Exactly, and the power of a home visit is that you meet the family on his or her turf, that territory, that place that you can call your own, that place that puts you in the position of power, and not the reverse of the ways in which, because many times we come across as the expert. We are the expert about the child. So we need to be able to share the expertise. Okay, it's a paradigm shift. Okay, it's a paradigm shift. But the family workplace, I think, could be a focus for us in getting the message out about what is important relative to development. It's a lot of what we do. It certainly is in many situations, given the young ages of the children. 75% of what is happening between the hours of 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. Because really, that's about the amount of time that a young child can actually interact. By the time a child who is coming to us very early in the morning and leaving very late at night because of the work that the family does, and also the location of the work. We didn't mention that, but that's pretty critical as well. The location of the workplace from where the child lives and where the child is cared for during the day. Because sometimes families in larger cities have a commute. So if the family lives in Allentown and is taking the turnpike into Philly every day, that's a long commute. For those individuals after 9/11 who relocated to Monroe County from the New York City area, and now we see the reverse of that taking place, 14 years later. But that was a very long commute and a long, long day for children.
And not even talking about like long days, like what time are the parents working till? So then they pick the child up. So what time are these children eating dinner? What time are they going to bed? You know, what their evening schedule is tells you a lot about
And how
behaviors
much
that
time,
might be occurring in the morning.
exactly. And how much time is there for interaction, for family interaction? So is it a question of the family does not care?
Right.
Or is it the question of what Brockenbrenner would say, there are systems at play here. There are systems at play, not only out of the locus of control of the child, but also of the family.
I think also too, when like you're talking about kids and pickup times and staffing, and you know we're stressed out because we're waiting for our next staff to be able to leave, and there's always the child that's perpetually, mom's always running 15 minutes late, and the child always hears it. Yo, your mom's late, or oh, is Billy's mom here? No, she's late again. Like, and instead of maybe turning our sensitivity toward, well, maybe Billy's mom needs that extra 15 minutes to come up the highway because now we know that she's coming from Wilkes-Barre. Like, I never knew you were coming from Wilkes-Barre. That makes sense totally that there's always traffic. Why don't we mark your pickup time up 15 minutes later? Because poor Billy doesn't need to hear that he's the last child there every single day and to be made to feel bad about. Billy's mom comes at 5:30 now instead of 5:15, and I think that helps parents and it makes them feel more on your side as well and more open to you because you don't want them getting into an accident coming up, and you also don't want that animosity. Like you were driving all the way to get here for this child, and then you come in and you're made to feel bad about it.
Exactly, and as detrimental as the auditory message that the child gets relative to the conversation that takes place prior to the mom getting there and then with the mom, it's also the physical communication that is done, the nonverbal communication, the closed arms, the frown instead of the smile, and perhaps even a lack of communication, no communication. Like if you think I'm talking with you today after you made me wait, okay? These are things that you don't have to be around for years and years and years. You don't need 94 years of collective experience to know that these things exist. And what we're saying is these things affect the ways in which children develop. And if our goal is optimum developmental outcomes for all children, not only do we need to be aware, we have to obviously, and we do need to raise the level of awareness of those who we lead, okay? But we also then have to create policies, as you were talking about, we have to create policies that ensure that we put this into play in our work environment.
And on top of that too, Fran, I will say the neighborhood and community is an extremely important aspect that you need to know as well, where the children are spending most of their time on weekends at nighttime or in the morning if they're coming in the afternoons because their moms go to work later in the afternoon. And that can seriously affect a child as well.
Yeah.
And we need to be sensitive to that and to understand it.
Absolutely, and in so many of our communities, and I'm always thinking of Wilkes-Barre, some of you are probably aware of where that is, and some of you might not be, but I turn the Channel 16 news, I think it comes on at 4:30 now, but every morning I get up very early and I like to catch the news. And the first thing that I hear is that there's another shooting, and these are high-rise, low-income housing projects where children live.
Yes.
And I think what an environment that these children need to navigate. You know, it is certainly something that we would never want to see children have to experience, and yet every day there is a different shooting. And the whole idea, I mean, they're focusing on an idea that will clear that area out and relocate all those people because they can't get their arms, public officials cannot get their arms around the problem. They cannot eradicate what is happening. But that's an awful environment in which to raise children. Okay. Does anybody want to say any of those kinds of things? Obviously, I think we're really pretty familiar with family social networks because it also ties into neighborhood and community. But social networks many times also exist with extended families. So we have families who have extended family networks. And more and more and more, we work with families who do not have those extended networks. There is no one to call in case of an emergency. There is no one to watch the child in case of a prolonged illness. And when you think about that, families, particularly single heads of household, are just alone. You know, there's no one that they can call, and if they're experiencing difficulty at work, or if they're having difficulty navigating the child care arena, or if they're having difficulty navigating social services, there's no one that they can rely on to even share that difficulty with. And sometimes the only consistent place in their lives would be your service. And so the more we are aware of that, and to the extent possible, with the multiple hats that we wear, the more that we can raise the level of awareness of our staff to be a light in their lives. You know, the niceties, the hello in the morning, how was your day in the evening? Those are the kinds of things, because we may offer the only social support that these individuals have. And that's another thing. Once again, all connected to getting the message out there. What makes a difference for children? What makes a difference for children are the things that make a difference for families. The way that children are going to experience good developmental outcomes is going to be to the extent to which their families can engage with us and subsequently with their children around the issues that we'll discuss. You know this. I know you know this. Let's get our message across. Okay, there's another thing I want to go back to, and let me see, the culture, where you look at culture, and it's the macro system. Here we go. And I want to look at culture and customs, and I want to go back to something that we talked about this morning, and it's crying. And we kind of left that like a dangling party. Okay, and I want to go back to it because I said, perhaps in a different system, in a different culture, the way in which we would have
Mhm.
handled the crime would have been different, okay? Can you think of a strategy that we might borrow from another culture?
I have a staff member who worked for me, who worked at child care centers in Europe. And when there was an excessive crier or an excessive behavior problem child, up to the age of 5, which I find totally unbelievable, they had packs. They would put the child on their back, and that child would be nurtured and carried around. And she is the teeny tiniest little woman I've ever seen. And she said she had a child that his legs came down to her knees, and she would carry him on her back all day long.
That's exactly what I was thinking about. And once again, please, I don't want anyone leaving here and said, Fran Langan said we should be putting kids on our backs. But I want you to think of what a natural thing that is in so many cultures. In so many cultures, first of all, in many cultures where, there are not accessible methods of birth control, and there are many children that are born, and this is given the fact that they would live, all live and thrive, that the ways in which families care for children are just that. There may be a child on a back and a child, in the front of a family member, and the family member might be out working in the fields.
I'm not working out in the fields, but I do it with the twins.
You do it with the twins, okay, well, there you go.
And people always look at me weird.
Well, and obviously, anything in our culture that's different, we view as weird, or not acceptable, or what is wrong with that person,
Yeah.
okay? And really, the broad thinking person many times is the enlightened individual, and certainly when you have 3 children under the age of 3, you come up with strategies that work for you and work for the children. So the idea, if you're working in a toddler classroom, to have some packs where you could carry a child who is, and it doesn't have to be crying, whiny crying, okay? And we can differentiate cries. We've been in the business a long time. We know when a child is whiny, used to getting his or her own way. We can differentiate that from a distressed cry.
Yeah.
We can differentiate that from a child who's in pain. The cries are different. We know that. Research tells us that the cries are different. So that's a cultural perspective that sometimes when we don't have a strategy, we can borrow from other cultures. The other thing that we are not looking at, but certainly when we look at, you mentioned cultures that are torn by war. Think about the exodus to Europe, individuals displaced by war. And one of the things that keeps coming up, and this impacts not only individuals living in other countries, there's no food. There's no food, so the nutrition is so poor. And if we want good developmental outcomes, what do we need to start with? We need to start with well-nourished people giving birth to well-nourished babies. And then we need to feed those babies. And sometimes, we're, depending on the workplace of the family, where are we feeding the people in this country? McDonald's. Absolutely, we're feeding the people in this country at McDonald's. So, these are some of the things we need to keep in mind. But we are in the process now of studying the development of children who are in countries, growing up in countries torn by war and strife and poverty, excessive poverty and malnutrition. So all of these things, however, we don't have to necessarily look to other countries. We can find those situations in our own midst. Okay. Questions? Any questions?
Well done.
That was awesome.
Thank you very much. Okay. All right, stretch. Turn off the camera. You know what, we'll have to turn the camera around when we do discussion so everybody hears you.